Welcome, Facebook. This is Jim Blythe, and this is the Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you today, and we're going to do something special. Joining me, Marc Liebman, Captain, U.S. Navy, SAR Rescue Pilot. So stand by. We go live on our broadcast in just a few seconds. Share us, get it out there. This is a pre-recording that will be rebroadcast at the end of the month. Thank you. Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our motto is Charlie Mike. Continue the mission. I'm your host, Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy Vietnam veteran and certified senior advisor. Join me as we feature veterans who continue the mission of leadership and commitment in our communities after serving our great nation. Why, you never know who you're going to meet or where we're going to go. So welcome aboard. Hey, what a beautiful day, and Christmas is over, and we're headed into New Year's. And yes, I agree. Mark, Christmas is over. Thank goodness, because it's always so much going on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Marc Liebman, Captain, U.S. Navy, retired SAR Rescue Pilot. He was in Vietnam the same time I was. And matter of fact, I think you landed on the O-boat several times. He is also a remarkable friend, author, lecturer, organizer. One of the things is I enjoyed so much your books, the Cherubs 3 and Big Mother 40. Cherubs 2, Big Mother 40. And I did call you up after I read, and I said, buddy, this is not fiction. This is fact. And you kind of laughed and said, yeah, we had to change a few names. But Mark, your books are so enjoyable. And so today, though, you do a lot of research. And before we get started, I need to say some thank yous, but I got to tell you, we're going to have a great program about what's going on in the world and what we're faced with in 2024. And we're going to talk about Putin. We're going to talk about what's going on in Ukraine. And Mark does so much research. It's like a fabulous experience to be with him. So I want to say a special thank you to DBTV Network and Amazon Fire and Roku and the AUN Network out in California. So please subscribe to us on your YouTube channel, on Facebook. Make us a part of what you're doing and share us not only with veterans, but with the public. Our goal is to bring this nation back together by showcasing men and women who have done exceptional things and exceptional things that are going on. Now, let's also say thank you to Fairway Independent Mortgage, my mortgage company. My NMLS number is 311548, and the corporate one is 2289. I provide senior care. I provide reverse mortgage lending, and we're a great company. We're across the nation. If you're anywhere in this nation and you want to talk to me, my number is 214-502-4600. And to Joe in Jacksonville, thank you for being always there, buddy. You're something else. Joe is a neat guy. I've talked to him. He was a machinist mate, lives in Jacksonville, Florida. So anyway, Mark, let's get started in talking about what's going on in the world and talk about Putin's war.
All right, let's go. All right, so I found this cartoon on one of the news networks, Fox, and I think it's absolutely appropriate. And the whole idea we're going to talk about today is Putin, NATO, Russia, all are at the same crossroad. But I'm going to shift to the Russian side, and we're going to talk about what Putin's options are. So when the war started, which, by the way, his 10-day special military operation is now on day 687, and that's actually the count, because I actually went back and counted them up. So he's taken 687 days to do what he thought he could do in 10 days. So anyway, when you start looking at this during the summer after the Ukrainian offensive, which kind of stalled out, and we can get into why if you want to, but I want to talk more about Putin. He really was faced with three options. And option one, and this is the one that gets the most press and has about zero chance of happening, but the U.S. media loves to run with it when he starts rattling the nuclear option. It's never going to happen. And the reason why it's never going to happen is, one, his generals won't let him because they know they're going to die, as well as much of Russia, because instantly trigger a NATO reaction that's not something that Putin wants to do, because then he really will be at war with NATO. And by the way, the U.S. is part of NATO. And so I think that the chance of this happening is zero. It's just playing to the media. It's part of the propaganda game. So that's option one. If you looked at this in June of 2023, he had another option. And the other option was, or second option, which was try to negotiate a ceasefire. He was clearly losing on the ground in the Ukraine. And so maybe he could find a graceful way out. And I don't think Zelensky at that point, nor NATO, was anywhere interested in doing that, because a ceasefire would basically give Russia time to reconstitute, regroup, and come back 6 months, 8 months, a year later, even if a treaty was signed. So while that wasn't an attractive option for NATO, it was also really not an attractive option for Putin unless he get one that was favorable to him. So it also would have theoretically given him a graceful way out. Hi, I started this, and now I'm going to leave Russia in a better position on the ground than it was when I started, and now I'm going to leave office and go count my billions. At that time, I thought the chance of that happening was 50-50. I think it probably is, maybe today, maybe not, but it probably won't happen. So the option that I think is what's going on, and the decision was made in Russia, not only by Putin, but also by others, was drag this out until the West gets tired of the fight. And the reason I use West as opposed to NATO, because there are many other non-NATO nations supporting Ukraine. The Australians, the Japanese, there's a whole host of nations that are also involved, both from a military supply standpoint, as well as from an economic perspective, as well as diplomatic. So this is just what we think, or I think he's doing. I think this is, and there's some examples as to why. So let's stop there for a second and say why, and discuss why we're in this position. Despite what a lot of the pundits in the media are talking about, that there's a stalemate, it is and it isn't. The Ukrainians continue to hold the tactical initiative and maybe even the strategic initiative. By this, I mean they're continuing to degrade Russia's ability to resupply its forces on the ground in Ukraine. They have made it very, very difficult for them to operate, and the Russian army is purely on the defensive. It has lost its offensive capabilities primarily because the troops that it started with the war are gone. And the biggest thing that I point to this and saying is that the Royal Uniformed Services Institute, which is the think tank for the British Armed Forces, is kind of the keeper of the losses, of the official head count or body count and truck count. But in December of this year, they said that the Russians have lost over 150,000 dead. That's not killed. I mean, that's not wounded. That's not injured. That's DEA dead, KIAs, as we would say. And they've suffered about 320,000 total casualties, of which about another of that, beyond the 150,000 dead, another 100,000 or so are crippled for life, i.e. paraplegics, blind, amputees, God knows what else. But their functionality as a normal human being has been impaired. And yet Russia has been able to absorb this, or at least Putin has been able to keep this pretty much from the Russian people, although the number of parents who are now without their sons or now have a maimed son is growing, and it's getting harder and harder to keep. So he's got lots and lots of internal problems within the Russian military. Its logistics system is weak. A lot of the weapons don't work, and that's a whole other conversation as to why. But and also his armed forces were unable to execute what we call combined operations in against the Ukraine.
Let me ask you a question. With all of this going on, and we see that the Russian military is not nearly as effective as everybody thought it was, because you said 10 days and it was supposed to be over. It's now almost 2 years. Or it's over 2 years.
It's almost 2 years, yes.
So you're looking at a really, really weakened Russian military. And as you said, the threat of nuclear weapons has fallen away. What does that do to us in the United States and to the world in terms of economics and everything else. For instance, they have a huge oil supply, then pipeline that goes through that area, correct?
Yeah, it's been cut off, Nord Stream 1 and 2.
Right. What are some of these things in 2024 that may change, that may open things up in the oil industry, may open things up in trade? We've also, one of the things is the Ukraine was a breadbasket of that part of the world. And
Yep.
they haven't been able to grow anything other than, bomb fragments. And so with this, we're faced with supporting a Ukraine, not only financially, but, with food, with military equipment, everything. And where does this put us in 2024? What do
Okay,
you
so
think?
you've jumped to the end of this
Oh,
discussion.
I'm sorry.
But that's okay. We'll go right there. So, number one, this is a war that the West / NATO cannot lose. Period. End of statement. We have a bunch, and I'm going to use a really nasty word, morons in both parties, and a couple presidential candidates who think, well, we'll just force a ceasefire, we'll just cut off aid. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Okay.
Okay.
Because if the Ukraine does not prevail, and that means that Russia will basically step back, wait 2 or 3 years, and we're going to be back here again.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing it means is that the leaders in Beijing, Pyongyang, Tehran will all look at this and say the West is weak, the U.S. is weak, and we can play. And the best example I can give this is that there was a celebrated meeting between the leaders of the Islamic Republic of Iran and Putin in this past summer. I don't remember the exact dates. And they apparently discussed a lot of things, one of which was continuing or expanding military aid from Iran to Russia. Russia was going to give them some fighter jets. But there are also some other things that came out, we think, or at least I think, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is that there were some other discussions like what can Iran do to help Russia in its campaign against Ukraine? Well, the simple thing is look around the world where there are vast stocks of U.S. munitions. Israel. Oh, interesting. I've got, as proxies, Iran, I've got Hezbollah and I've got Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is that the suggestion was made or hinted at that Iran do something because Hamas would not have done anything without the blessings of Iran. They provide 95% of their money. They provide all of their training, all of their equipment. There are thousands of IRGC advisors in what was in Gaza. And we see what we see on October 7th. So there's a lot, and also you see the Houthi rebels or the Houthis in Yemen shooting missiles at U.S. and other ships transiting the Gulf of Aden, and so there's a cost to walking away from this. The second thing, from NATO's perspective, this is on their doorstep. The Europeans have taken the lead, and every NATO country member's leader has said Ukraine must win. There is one exception. And you want to guess who he is?
I don't know. I'm not.
He lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Oh, no.
He said everything around this. Well, yeah, we think Ukraine, we're going to support Ukraine to the end. We think that Ukraine should do this. We think Ukraine should do that. But he's never said Ukraine must win. Okay? The Brits have said it. The president of NATO have said it, and he wouldn't have said it unless he had NATO's majority. Even countries like Turkey and other countries have said Ukraine must prevail. Okay, so the Europeans see this as an existential threat to themselves.
So if he controls the Ukraine, if he wins, then they're all sitting there sweating blood because he's going to take more. He's not going to stop there.
The last guy who played this game was named Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, and you know what? There was a moron in England.
Yeah, Chamberlain.
Neville Chamberlain, who basically placated, and as a result, and history has said, had Neville Chamberlain stood up like a man and said, no, but hell no, we're not going to let this happen, World War II probably would not have happened to the level that it did.
Yeah, if it did happen, it would happen several years later. and by which time the Brits would have had time to rearm, the U.S. would have rearmed, and the French would have figured out what to do. I mean, yeah, that's a wonderful what if, but appeasement. The bottom line about this is appeasement with dictators never works, whether they're a tin pot dictator or they're a dictator of a major power. And you look at this, and we see things that Xi Jinping is doing with the PRC, provoking Taiwan, but they're also doing things to stick knives in various people's faces, or eyes, to use the Texas expression, around the world. And again, it's why they see the U.S. as being leaderless and weak. And until that changes, this will continue, and it will get worse.
And so the net effect, from my opinion, for having been through Vietnam as a child, we were there during Korea, as a child, and you look at this, and if you don't stop them, then it just keeps growing and going and going. And so we've got to stop this. And what you're basically saying is our leadership is severely lacking. And unfortunately, that's a political statement that we try and dance around, and that's part of the problem. We're dancing around it.
Yeah, I mean,
we're not addressing it.
Yeah, we need somebody like, again, President Reagan has said, there's an axis of evil. Well, there's a new axis of evil.
Right.
It's in Moscow, it's in Tehran, it's in Pyongyang, and it's in Beijing. So there's a couple really ugly issues about this. So one of which is I've read some, quote, talking heads and saying, well, what's going to happen if Putin walks away? Whether he dies in office, he's 71, whether he dies in office, is assassinated, or he won't get voted out this March because the elections are already rigged. But let's say he's forced to leave. Who's going to take over? And that is a really interesting question, because there's 5 power bases in Russia. They're the oligarchs. There's only a couple hundred of them. They're the ones who, I use the word loosely, stole the means of production when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991.
So they're the billionaires.
The billionaires. Some of them have gotten out, but they're all suffering from sanctions, which keep them from getting access to their money.
Yeah.
Okay. The best example I can use is the guy who owned Chelsea, and he was forced to sell it he originally got offers 20 cents on the dollar, around that, and he sold it for about 70 cents on the dollar. This is a football club that's worth like the Dallas Cowboys. So do I need to quiet?
No, Mark, I'll tell you what, let's do. We're going to continue this conversation because we're talking about world affairs and what impacts us as Americans today in 2024. So we're going to be back talking more about this and then wishing you a great and happy new year as we make our prognostications about 2024 and how things are going to go. I've got some ideas, and I know Mark's got some great ideas, and he does a lot more research than I do. So we're going to be right back after these words from all of our partners. Again, thank you to Fairway Independent Mortgage, and thank you to Marc Liebman for being on board with me today. This is Veterans Impact Show, and we're here for you to really help.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show, and thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation.
I got to tell you, this is the last of 2023. I'm so glad to see this year gone. I got to tell you, I've had enough. I'm ready to go on. I got my business plan for 2024, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited about many of the programs, and I'm also excited because I think within the next week or two, we're going to have a major announcement about another network that we're going to be working with that's going to help get the word out to help people. So around the world. And speaking of around the world, we live in a global society, Mark, and we're really talking about the impact of Putin in the Ukraine and Russia and how that's interacting with Iran, how that's interacting with China, and how that's going to affect us. And let me tell you something. It's kind of scary what could happen.
Yes.
So one of the things is I want to ask you about the U.S. economy and how that can be helped by the war in the Ukraine or hurt by the war in the Ukraine. Either way.
Yeah, we're going to come back to the leadership in the Soviet Union and who could take over after, if in fact Putin leaves office for some reason. But one of the more interesting things is that the Russian economy has been put on what they call a war footing. So everything is basically that's consumer related has been shoved to the back burner, and they're doing nothing but producing munitions. Well, what's really interesting is back in the 1980s, 1990s, under Reagan, we forced the Russians or the Soviet Union to choose between guns and butter. They couldn't produce both, and we knew it. And between stealth, rearming of NATO, and the U.S. Military modernizing, we basically forced the Russian. Star Wars was the other thing. Forced the Russians to realize that they could not compete with the United States. Well, today that's still is true. Our economy is several times larger than the Russian economy, and if the administration, whether it's this one or the next one, goes ahead and puts the defense industry on not necessarily a war footing, but on a higher priority, and basically starts, shoving money at it and buying stuff to support the war in Ukraine, which is starting to do, but it's not doing enough of it. Then how does this impact the U.S. economy? Well, it does something really simple. It creates jobs, and because so instead of producing what we 100,000 or 155 millimeter artillery shells a month, we suddenly can produce 500,000 or 1 million. Factories are going to have to be built up, and the smart thing is not to have one, but to have two or three. And the same thing with aircraft production. We can increase the number of F-35s we are producing. Yes, there's a limit to the production line, but let's get to the maximum. We're not there yet. Ships, we can build more ships. Yes, we only have a few shipyards, but we can build more ships because we are the nation that basically is the arsenal of democracy during two world wars. And that is one of the strengths of the U.S. economy is that, okay, you need this stuff. Give me a couple of weeks. Let me go figure out how, and we'll go do it. I mean, during World War II, we were building Liberty ships, one every, it took I think it was 90 days from start to finish, but we were building ships, we were building battleships, we were building destroyers, aircraft carriers. It was amazing. And that continued even though we have drawn down in the size of our armed forces, but we can do that. The trouble is it comes back to, guess what? One magic word. Leadership. Somebody in the White House saying this is what we must do. We must galvanize and then come up with a plan to galvanize and gain support of the American public, because the current administration has not done a good job selling the importance of the war in Ukraine to the United States and its population.
That's a major problem. Matter of fact, I think back of so many things that all of this is having a negative impact on us. And it could really, really hurt us. Bad energy policy, bad transportation. I would say also bad border policy and immigration. We've got no immigration policy.
Correct.
We've got no policy to take these people who have come here and try and integrate them into society and see to it that they can be productive. So
that's a whole nother conversation.
Whole nother conversation.
That's out of scope. So let me come back to the Russian problem here in a second. So let me come back to the power bases within Russia. So besides the oligarchs, who are few in number, relatively speaking, they don't have a lot of they have political clout, but most of them are dependent on Putin for being in the position they are. So they're more or less, I want to use the word neutered, but they are. The other organization that scares the crap out of me is the mafia. The Russian mafia, different from the Italian mafia, and the people who I've talked to say that the mafia makes the Italian mafia look like choir boys. You see us occasionally pop up in movies, but these are not nice people. They control large segments of the Russian economy. A lot of the NGOs that do, non-government organizations that do hacking, which are funded by the GRU. And so they're, again, nice people. They would love to gain control or larger control of the Russia, because then they can create an empire the likes of which only novelists and Ian Fleming created when he created Spectre. But
the evil empire.
The evil empire. Then there are the generals. The Russian generals, like the most Western generals, are typically politically neutral until it comes time for them to pick the winner or join the winning side. In other words, they'll wait, they'll watch the tea leaves and say, okay, so-and-so's winning, we're going to back him, and then they'll do that. But the Red Army is very reluctant to fire on the Russian people. That showed itself very, very clearly in 1991 during the coup against Gorbachev, which was led by the KGB. And you saw the attack on what was then the British Parliament building. They called it the White House, and the Russian army refused to, after a few shells, refused to engage and physically attack the building. It took highly trained, very loyal special forces units to go in there, and that has been since. They have been since castigated for doing that. So then there's a group of people in Russia I call the Democrats. They're the people who want democracy. But Russia has zero history of democracy, so I don't give them a whole lot of chance. We'll pick up the hardliners when we come back.
I got to tell you, in talking about this, why in the end of 2023, well, what have we had? 2 years of war in the Ukraine. We've got the Chinese poking at Formosa. We're seeing so much unrest. How is that affecting us? Go fill your car up. Go take a look at inflation. There's many, many reasons for all of these things, and they have impacted us in 2023. The question I have is, where are we going? What's our plan for 2024? And if you understand the problem, then you can start working towards a solution. Wouldn't you agree, Mark?
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be talking more about this as we continue in just a second. Thank you for all of our partners, and we'll be right back. Veterans Impact Show here for you.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show, and thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation.
I got to tell you, where are we going to go in 24? You got to look back in 23 and see what can we do to do a better job, right, Mark?
Amen.
All right, and if you're tuned in late, this is Captain Marc Liebman, United States Navy pilot, SAR rescue pilot, great friend, author. You want to go to marcliebman.com, right?
Yep.
MarcLiebman, and take a look at his books. They're on Amazon. You are an Amazon bestseller.
5 of them.
5 of them. 5 of them. You know what? I have enjoyed your books about Vietnam, but I'm also enjoyed your Sail series, which is a historical series. And you have gotten so interested in history and current events that's why we're bringing this. We're talking as a wrap-up of 2023. Where is the biggest thorn? I think the biggest thorn is in Russia, and we've talked about this and how this impacts because of what's going on in Ukraine.
Yes. So let's pick up the discussion. I think the war in Ukraine will dominate U.S. foreign policy along with what's going on in Israel, but or I should say Gaza. But I think the war in Ukraine is kind of 1A out of instead of Gaza's 1B. So let me come back to the last group of this, because this leads up to the answer to your question. The hardliners are few in number, but they're very vocal. And if you read, and I don't read Russian, but I read the translations, and because you can get them, because some of them actually produce the original copy in Russian, and then you can, if you go to their websites, you can get it in English and other languages. They are hardliners about the war and taking over Ukraine, because they are supporting Putin's view that Ukraine, particularly even if it's just a member of the EU, is a threat to Mother Russia. But when you look at the reality is NATO and EU is an economic thing. NATO is a defensive alliance, and it has no offensive goals other than when it's attacked. So I think those 5 groups would vie for power if Putin left office. The question is what would happen. And I put 3 options up here on this slide. One's civil war, the other is Stalinist repression, and one's democracy. I give democracy almost a 0 chance of happening. I'm talking about true representative democracy, whether it's parliamentary or republic, I don't care. I think there's going to be some sort of civil war. It won't be like the Russian Civil War of 1917 through 1922, which, by the way, the U.S., the British, and the French, and other nations deployed troops into Russia to support the whites, which were supporting the czars. And we all know how that happened. But I think what you'll see, it'll be a war of assassinations and bombings. But who wins, who comes out, I don't think anybody has a really good handle on it, but I think there will be a period of unrest. It may not start that way, but it will unless the people who gain control have control of the KGB and the other vehicles of repression within within Russia. And that's why I think whoever wins, you'll see some kind of Stalinist repression in terms of getting rid of any future opposition. So
that's their history.
That's exactly right. It's their history. So
That's
we
their
come back
history.
to what happens. How will this war in the Ukraine end? All wars end with some kind of negotiated settlement. The question is, what does the settlement look like? I cannot see the NATO or the Ukraine accepting any settlement that gives large chunks of territory to Russia. Does that mean they're not going to give up any, or are they going to give up some? I don't know, but I think that that will be part of this thing. The second thing is it has to include some kind of Russian military defeat that causes the Russians to realize they cannot win a war on the ground. Now, what is that going to look like? I don't know. Part of the problems that the Ukrainians ran into in the spring offensive was, one, it was a victim of the slow rolling of Western aid. It was another victim of Russian defenses that had a year to prepare, because the Russians are not dumb in terms of where you need to attack. And then the third thing is, I think the Russian army did okay in defense, but that doesn't do well on offense, mainly because of problems I can go into a lot later. But there's some kind of Russian military defeat. What does that look like? Don't know. But I think ultimately, if they cut the land bridge, either physically or with missiles or special forces, the land bridge between Crimea and the rest of the Soviet Union, Russia, that would be the kind of one of those events that say, to the Russians, we might want to look at this differently. The second part of this question, and this is the one that nobody wants to talk about, who's going to rebuild Ukraine?
Oh, big question.
No
Marshall Plan there.
Yeah. So if it's a Marshall Plan, guess who pays for it?
Yeah.
We. I think the Europeans would be much more interested in rebuilding Ukraine than as the United States. The Chinese might want to do that as a way of gaining influence and traction on the ground, but I wouldn't invite them to participate, because you're going to wind up with a Chinese fifth column inside whatever you're doing. And then the other part of the world is the Arab world, the sovereign funds of the Gulf cooperation states. These are the national funds, have got trillions, not billions. I'm talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars. That's another source of money. But it can be done. And the sad part, a lot of what has been destroyed in the Ukraine is priceless stuff that survived World War II that goes back centuries. It's now gone. And it will take, some people, what about the corruption in Ukraine? Well, Zelensky has been very quietly attacking that, because he knows that any future long-term support has to do that. And he's been ruthless when he finds somebody at senior levels and junior levels. You're gone, done, you're gone, give me your money. See you later. You're out. Some have gone to jail. Some have been publicly executed in terms of being publicly fired. So he knows he has to do that. And he campaigned on that as one of the ways to get into his office. And I think the Ukrainian people are behind that. But again, it's not instant gratification. And this rebuilding Ukraine will take years. But ultimately, again, the EU has said, yes, clean up your act politically, economically, we'll help you and you can join the EU. And NATO has said, yes, we will figure out a path to Ukraine, because any settlement is going to have to include some kind of security guarantees for Ukraine against Russia. So the simplest thing is, invite them to join NATO. And that would be that would be a crisis, not a crisis, but that would be a huge political or geopolitical defeat for Russia. But I think it's ultimately, I think it's the right answer. Ukraine as a neutral country, the idealists would like to see that because it doesn't threaten anybody. But again, unless it has security,
not reality.
It's not reality. Yeah, it needs a security guarantee, and the best security guarantee is either a military alliance with the United States, which I don't think is the right answer, but it's it's joining NATO, because the war in Ukraine will have done the two of the things that the the Soviet Union fought against since NATO was created. One, it added Finland and Sweden, so it expanded NATO, and two, it now has Ukraine as one of the largest suppliers of food on the planet as a member of NATO, and literally, it is a dagger into the heart of Mother Russia.
Okay, so in 2024, there are going to be changes.
Correct.
There are going to be all kind of changes.
We're going to have a new president.
We're going to have a new president, we hope. Let's don't go down that road right now.
No.
But there are going to be major, major changes. How's that going to affect me? Well, number one, energy. You know, while everybody is talking about electric vehicles, that's not sustainable right now. Everything I've read, that's not sustainable. And you've got to still have everything we touch is touched by petroleum. Everything.
Pretty much.
And so we've got to have a plan to work things together. We've got to have a plan to make things go. And our plan right now doesn't seem to have anything in it. And so with the change that is going to happen in the Ukraine, because that's the baseball bat that's swinging in the wind out there, correct?
It's one of them, yes.
Okay, so that's going to change. That will affect us. It could affect us positively or it could affect us negatively.
Correct.
And so we need to be looking as Americans, what do we want that to look like? And that's where we vote. That's where we take a stand. And part of the problem that we've got is we don't have a stand right now that's being portrayed to the American people.
Yeah. One of the joys of the internet and is that leaders in foreign countries can read U.S. publications and watch U.S. networks just as literally as they, are within seconds of the time it appears live. And so this is, they can do what they want to do to try to influence U.S. policy. The Russians have tried it. The Chinese are doing it. The Iranians are doing it. So we have to sit down and figure out what do we want to be when we grow up in 2024. And again, one of which is how do we deal with the energy policy? Now, the current administration is pushing the world to electric vehicles. Okay, fine. But they're also waging war on the U.S. energy industry, which, by the way, is the largest and most successful and most profitable in the world. So they can do things, the U.S. can, from an energy perspective, work with allies to provide energy and fund this transition. What the Greens don't like you to know is that the world has enough fossil fuel, known reserves of fossil fuel, for at least to go through the end of this century, okay? And there are reserves that are probably not discovered yet. It's one of the reasons they're starting to look in places where there is no production. But again, I don't want to, so we have to basically take the lead. Doesn't mean we have to dominate, but we have to say, this is what the U.S. stands for. This is the direction we're going. We're not going to, we're going to use economic power backed by military power. My favorite president, one of my three favorite presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, said, walk softly and carry a big stick. The big stick we need to recapitalize. That's another problem. The U.S. military is overextended. It's overcommitted, which is sort of the same thing. It's not exactly, but it's close enough. And then it's also horribly underfunded. And one of the things that we're going to face in the next 5 to 10 years is recapitalizing the U.S. military, but also the volunteer force is at risk. And that's a whole social question, which I want you to invite a mutual friend of ours to talk about.
Richard.
It's General Campbell, Campbell, who is basically taking this on as a project to and work on a board to actually look at this for DOD. And it's that is from a veteran's perspective, that is frightening because I'm 78, so I'm even though I like to tell people I'm immortal and I have proof. The fact that I'm sitting here, is proven.
Yeah,
but
you're
anyway,
gonna live to be Moses,
yeah,
right?
Methuselah would be okay. But anyway, the reality is that we're at the end. You and I and our generation are at the end so to speak, or nearing the end. And we've got a whole generation. My son, my grandchildren. I've got kids who are now and grandkids who are now in the U.S. military. We have a whole. They are facing something that we never had to face before. And that's, again, a question of somebody in the White House saying, this is policy, this is where we're going, this is how we're going to get there, and I need your support. And generally when they do that, Reagan, I'm going to use Reagan as an example because he crystallized in the American public's mind what the Cold War is all about and how we were going to win. And this, he said, this is how we're going to win. And oh, by God, in Iceland, Gorbachev came hat in hand and said, yes, yeah, we can't afford beans and butter and weapons, and yes, we're going to change. And that ultimately led to the fall of the Gorbachev regime and the Soviet Union. And so, but it was basically Reagan saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to create stealth, which will render all of the Soviet air defenses obsolete. We're going to create Star Wars, which basically threatens their ability to attack us with nuclear weapons. And we are going to rearm, recapitalize our military. And oh, by the way, we're going to get NATO to do it too, as well as some of our other allies. And they did, and they followed. And that culminated in Desert Storm, which was basically a showcase of U.S. military might. And then we peaked around 2000, and then we squandered it away in the 2000s. And I won't get into the mistakes we made in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah. It was a repeat of Vietnam, in my opinion.
Afghanistan was.
Absolutely. But what we're going to see in 2024 is change. Now, here's what I also think. In 2024, I think we're getting some realization of lack of leadership in both sides, both parties. And I think we're beginning to focus on getting that. I think we're also going to get some leadership from the Federal Reserve. I think we're going to see some leadership in energy policy, and I think we'll see interest rates coming down to a better level. Are they going to go back to where they were? No, I think they were supported artificially at very low levels. But we're going to get more stable. We have been in a bit of a roller coaster ride economically, especially with our industry, oil industry, under attack. So I see 2024 as a year of tremendous positive change. I think we're being forced into it.
I think it's going to be a year of the beginnings of some adjustment, and I don't know which way it's going to go, up or good or bad. You tell me who's in the White House and who wins the election in November and who has a majority in the House and Senate, and then I can sort of give you a direction. So let me finish.
Yeah, okay.
So here's one of the another ugly things that nobody wants to talk about. We have had at the rate, and depending on who you talk to, it's 7,000 to 10,000 illegal immigrants or immigrants entering the United States illegally, which makes them by definition illegal immigrants a day, okay, or a week. I don't care what number you use.
Oh, the number is huge.
It's huge. The fact of the matter is when they come into the United States, they have no status, which means they can't walk into a bank and start a checking account. They can't go get a mortgage on a home or get a good job, because the first thing an employer is legally required to do is show me your proof of residency, whether it's a work visa, or whatever.
Show me your proof.
Yeah, show me your proof. And so they're living in an economy that's preyed upon by people who are not very honest. They pay you serious rates to borrow cars. They can't buy a home. They can't get medical care because they can't get a policy. Why? Because their employers won't offer them because they don't have to, because they're not here legally. And so what happens is it creates a burden on the public health care system. So that all has to get fixed, because until that's fixed, it's a drag on the economy. Think about if these people are working working legally and paying taxes.
So what we're telling you is, if you want positive change, then get behind positive candidates who want to have a plan and want to do things. And I think this is unfortunately a time of major change, Mark.
I agree.
You're saying it. So we're going to be right back to finish this Veterans Impact Show.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show, and thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation.
We've been talking about 2023 and the Ukraine with Marc Liebman, who is a fantastic author, historian, and we're getting some kind of idea of where we are today and where we might go. And it could go either way, Mark, is what you're saying, based upon what happens to our election.
Yes, and I don't want to, again, pick, let me back up. It depends on the candidate who wins and what his or her philosophy is and whether or not he or she can is a good leader. There are some of the candidates who are very good leaders, but are policy disasters. There are some who can't lead their way out of a paper bag, and you can just watch and see what they're saying. Because I think this election is going to be one of the most crucial in the United States history, mainly because we have been basically at idle for 4 years, or about 4 years. And I can define idle if you want, but it's the economy is kind of limping along. The administration is doing its level best to ruin it because it's controlled by the left wing of the Democratic Party. It's not taking. It's trying to balance things because they're more afraid of losing the election than leading. And history has shown in the United States that leaders win re-election. Example: Teddy Roosevelt. Example: Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Another example: Ronald Reagan. Another example: George Bush, the second George Bush. Another example: Bill Clinton. Another example is Dwight Eisenhower. These are all men, and Harry Truman. These are all men who led and were not afraid to make tough decisions and then bring the country along. Whether you agree with their policies or not is not the issue. The issue is we need a leader in the White House who can create policy and bring the country along with him. Though the who, what, and where will follow out because most leaders are smart enough, good leaders, to listen to their advisors because they, as leaders, they find people who are smarter than they are in a lot of issues, and they take their counsel and then make a decision. End of sermon.
I couldn't agree with you more. So part of what we're saying is you want to have a great 2024, get involved.
Amen.
Vote, and
yes.
And understand what the candidates are really saying. Understand where they're coming from.
Read their policies.
Yeah, don't vote emotionally. This is not a cheerleading contest. This could be the turning point for the United States, for our people, our culture. And we've got to be one nation that is indivisible with liberty and justice for all. That means
under God.
Under God. Well, we'll finish that in the prayer. But by saying this, what we're saying is there has to be equal justice for everybody. And we have to have programs to help these people that have come in illegally, and we've got to get them assimilated into our country. We've got to start showing leadership all the way up and down.
We also have to get rid of corruption and have consequences for those who violate, those people in power who violate the law.
Without a doubt, and that's not been very effective. But so we're casting some pretty heavy spears here.
Yes,
but
we are.
I think it's time that we wake up, because what do you want to do? Do you want to watch this country go down? Do you want to watch this country really hurt? We've only hurt a little bit in 2023 compared to what we could have. Guys, I've been around for a long time. I'm 77 years old. I'm a year younger than you, and you look a lot better than I do. So let's come together. Let's work together. Both sides of the aisle. Let's work together instead of loggerheads beating each other up. Let's come together in this nation to start solving problems. And one of the biggest problems, I think, is leadership. And there's a lot of young men and women who would really love to follow great leadership that is accomplishing and doing great things. Without
Amen.
a doubt, we can change this nation into a positive nation for everybody, regardless of race, creed, religion, background, whatever you think you are. We can come together, because if we don't, A nation divided against itself will not stand. That's biblical. That's Abraham Lincoln. And I got to tell you something. We
George
need
Washington.
to do that, huh?
It's George Washington and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson,
Everybody.
Benjamin Franklin.
And we know that. That's pure logic, without a doubt. Well, Mark, all of these things being said, I know your sons, your grandsons, your family, very much involved in the military. One thing I would say to a young man or woman today is if you're graduating from high school or graduating from college and you don't take a look at the military and you don't get the opportunities available to you, you're missing out on a huge start in life. Wouldn't you agree?
Amen. Yes.
And there's something about military discipline. A lot of people go, oh, I hate discipline. No, let me tell you, if you're not disciplined,
You will not succeed.
you will not succeed. And a good example of that is, have you ever tried to ride a horse that's never been broken? It's called a bucking bronco. Yet you tried a great horse who has been trained and is phenomenal, and you go, wow, this is discipline that was put together properly, that was done not with a heavy hand, but with a quiet voice. Training. And the military
teamwork,
provides the best training and teamwork in the world. So
and
I want to
and
say,
leadership training.
yeah, I want to say a prayer because we're at the end, and this is the end of 2023. So, Lord God, King of the universe, we are so glad that you have been with us throughout 2023. We look back and we say, dear God, be with us and go forward with us. Dear God, thank you for your hedge of protection around our active duty military and our first responders, all of which run into the fire instead of away from it. Dear God, we thank you for our veterans, and they're making a difference in this nation in a positive way for everybody. Lord God, I thank you for so very much. I thank you for living in this country, and I thank you for this country wanting to always be positive. So, dear God, thank you, and we are here with you. Amen. Thank you. Mark, we've said it before, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is Veterans Impact Show. We'll be back next year with great programming for you. Take a look